Hi there, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Hi, I'm Ariel Eck, and I lead B2B marketing here at Foursquare. We work with academics, as well as developers, policymakers, data scientists, and nonprofits to make the world a better, smarter, safer, and more inclusive place through the power of location technology. I'm excited to be joined here today by two academic researchers, Tassos Noulas from the University of Cambridge and Alex Singleton from the University of Liverpool to discuss how location intelligence fuels research. Today, we'll discuss how they utilized Foursquare location technology to generate knowledge in order to guide urban planning and derive consumer insights. They'll also share their perspective on the value of location intelligence, both for academics and for commercial use cases. They'll then share how they might plan to use location data and technology in their future work. So thank you so much for joining us today. And please feel free to leave any questions in the chat. And if we have time, we'll get to them at the end. Alex and Tassos, thank you so much for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you here. And we'd love to kick it off by having you introduce yourselves and perhaps sharing a little bit about what your research is focused on. So maybe I'll hand it over to Tassos to start.
Yeah. So thank you for the invitation, Ariel. It's great to be here. Thanks to the Foursquare team for putting this together. Great to be with Alex, a long esteemed colleague as well. So I'm Tassos Noulas. I've been working with, let's say, Foursquare data for almost 14 years now, getting old myself. And yeah, I've been focusing in the areas of studying human mobility, primarily in urban environments in cities, understanding how mobility manifests. And then, of course, that spiraled out to many different applications and all the way to applying some of this research in an industry setting now. I've been, enjoying using, let's say, large-scale Foursquare data analysis and seeing the impact of this type of research in real-life applications as well.
Amazing. Alex, how about you?
Hi, I'm Alex Singleton. I'm Professor of Geographic Information Science at the University of Liverpool, and I set up something here called the Geographic Data Science Lab. So we do a lot of work at the intersection of data science and geography. And my personal research that I'm involved in centers around urban analytics, and I'm interested in building models of cities, specifically geodemographic models, so how cities look and how you can use data to describe cities. I'm also interested in functional differences of cities, so how different parts of the cities operate and how they might operate over different times of the day. A lot of the work that I do, in addition to using sort of data like Foursquare data, is broadly in the area of consumer data, and I run an ESRC centre called the Consumer Data Research Centre here, where we use lots of different what we call digital footprints data in the UK. So the things that aren't necessarily data that are collected for particular purposes, but they're data that are generated by store cards or transit systems. And then we use those to kind of inspect different elements of cities. A lot of the work that we do is kind of around mobility as well. And we look at anything from sort of urban scale to sort of global scale.
Amazing. Thank you for the quick overview and excited to dive more into it. Perhaps we can start by touching on how you came to learn about Foursquare's data and technology. I believe Tassos mentioned you started working with it quite a long time ago, and so perhaps you could share more about that experience and how you connected to one another.
Yeah, so we have to go back to 2010. I was beginning my PhD at the University of Cambridge, and I was desperate to find, that's what every PhD student goes through, by the way, find a PhD topic, amazing research question to answer. And I was chatting with my PhD advisor, and she was like, okay, focus in the area of mobility. So I was looking for data. And I was sitting, I remember in my college room looking at my Twitter feed, and then I saw some Foursquare check-ins going public there. So I was like, wow, this is an amazing new data emerging, available at large scale. Essentially people telling where they are and what they do. So I went back to the lab with some first analysis of the first data set I pulled from Foursquare API. And I discussed it with my colleagues and my advisor, and I thought here, look, we can see where people go. They walk into the museum or they walk into stores, and we can see that across many cities in the world and with very high temporal granularity. So we were all super excited, and yeah, that's how I got to know Foursquare, and that's basically I started doing my research from that point hereafter.
Amazing. And then, yeah, what about you, Alex?
Yeah, I must say my connection's actually through Tassos explicitly to Foursquare. So we've run the ESRC Consumer Data Center since about 2014. And so one of the things that I have to do as part of that is to work with external data partners on these kind of digital footprints data to access them to do research within the center, but also to get access to data and kind of promote its use more generally. And Foursquare was obviously a brand I know. I think you sponsor a lot of the podcasts that my wife listens to, so I hear it over our sort of Sonos speakers. But there was, I think it was in 2019, I think, Tassos, there was this NetMob conference, which is around, sort of broadly speaking, sort of geographic data science of mobility data. And there was a specific Future Cities Challenge, which I think Tassos was coordinating with Foursquare. And what that enabled researchers who applied to that data challenge to do was to access the data sets. There wasn't really a set question as such, but just a whole series of different challenge areas to demonstrate where the data might have utility for different kind of urban problems, basically. So we kind of spent, we applied, we got access to the data. It was massive, which is great because that's kind of the thing we like working with. And we just threw pretty much everybody at it to do all of the things that they were currently doing in their other research projects, but using these data. And then we kind of connected it together and developed a sort of narrative around sort of functional dynamics of global cities, which we later had published. But it was a really enjoyable experience and very interesting. We learned a lot through it.
Amazing. Perhaps you can dive a little bit deeper into why you decided to use Foursquare's location data and technology and how it made a difference in your research combined with these other data sets that you mentioned.
I'll start on that one, Tassos. Shall I? I was going to say, I mean, I say we use a lot of these consumer data. The thing for me about why the Foursquare data I think is interesting and useful, I say we mostly used it as sort of an output of having available this sort of global coverage data set, essentially comprising of sort of two things: points of interest, but then also dynamics of use of those points of interest as well. So you can both characterize where places are, which is interesting. You can look at what places are providing functionally. So, you know, are they kind of restaurant areas or business parks and those types of things? And then you can also look at how people are interacting with those as well. So you can delineate all of this geography. And so the work that we've done and why we thought it was very exciting is normally we just focus on the UK, and that's what our centre tends to focus on. But this is a kind of a global comparison from data that are sort of collected by the same mechanisms. So we found the sort of global coverage really interesting and the temporal dynamics really interesting as well.
Yeah, I'll agree with Alex there. Especially, I think one of the unique elements that Foursquare has historically brought into the location intelligence and mobility space is this relationship between people and venues, and being able to derive large-scale venues databases from that, accurate description of places, and also how people interact with places. So it was really the first time back, I mean, about 10 years ago, and it's still largely true that, you know, the ability to have a view of cities around the world at the level of a place, because yes, you get geotag data, let's say from Twitter, but that gives you geo coordinates, latitude and longitude. You don't get the information about a specific place. And in fact, I think Foursquare is powering Twitter place assignment as well at the moment. So having that viewpoint and being able to understand, you know, what drives mobility, how does the density of places in a city matter when people move? So let's say I want to study how far people go and why in a city. And I can ask the question, does density matter? Does the density of places matter here? So let's say if I'm in New York and I need to buy a sandwich, density is very high. There's lots of sandwich places. I travel short distances. But when I'm in LA, it's a, let's say, more, let's say, broadly distributed or widely distributed geographically speaking city. And then again, you can look at how this place density plays a role in terms of like driving urban mobility. And so places can really drive a lot of insight in research questions that usually academics and researchers ask in the mobility context. But also, of course, real world applications and things that are happening in the industry are affected by that, let's say, venue-centric perspective of Foursquare data.
Right, right. Absolutely. It's helpful to hear those specific examples. In terms of, you know, specific aspects of Foursquare data that make it different from other, you know, POI or movement data offerings, one thing that we think about a lot is our first party data and the rich context that comes from that and the human element. So I wonder if you might be able to speak a bit to how that plays a role in your research and if that was a deciding factor on using the data.
Yeah, I think Alex mentioned the things around consumer behavior and user analytics. I think that is a very important one, and maybe I'll let Alex elaborate more on that, and you know how we can understand how businesses can become successful or how events, social events, can affect businesses. But also, I think another interesting part is not only what users go to places, but also how users connect to places. And we should not forget that Foursquare has a Swarm, a social network platform as well, so people can actually become friends and connect to each other, follow each other. And one of the interesting aspects of this data, having like the places and mobility information, and on top of that the social layer, also gives you opportunity to answer questions related to social science. Such as what type of places foster social connections and social relationships, or how do communities of people form in the urban space, and moreover, how do these, let's say, phenomena evolve across cultures, across different cities, but also over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've got any data that can kind of measure as close to real time, you know, the dynamic nature of cities, because they aren't, you know, they aren't static entities. And you know, as an academic, you know, traditionally you're, you know, reliant on sort of large surveys like the census or sample surveys, which don't give you sort of comprehensive coverage. And data like Foursquare or other digital footprints data start to give you insights both to looking at the sort of temporal aspects of how cities operate, so you can actually look at functions of places over time. But then also potentially telling you things that these traditional data don't necessarily tell you. So new insights that you can only get from those types of data. And I think that's, to me, sort of the hallmark of why these data are interesting and are worth investing time in using. You know, the constraint is, and why platforms are important, is they are more difficult to use, of course, but the value is there. But it's one of the challenges of that is that the ways in which you can sort of communicate insight from that and sort of derive insights from it require kind of new sort of geographic data science methods, which aren't necessarily in the toolkits of, say, urban planners who've typically been sort of making sort of assessments of cities and using sort of more traditional data sources. So I think there's huge value, but possibly some challenges as well around how you can access the information from the data.
Yeah, can you elaborate a bit more on the challenges that you faced when working through the research using our data set? You know, you talked about the sort of crowdsourced element being a pro and a con in some ways.
I mean, from the perspective of the work we did, we had a sort of, you know, a series of stages. In a sense, we sort of threw ourselves into it, and we essentially were using kind of new and inventive methods, but applied to those data. So, you know, as I said, we work within this geographic data science lab. So we're not using methods that are typically a geographer would typically have. They're kind of more infused with things that maybe a computer scientist or a data scientist would bring. The data are very, very large, so that in itself adds a sort of dimension of how you can get particular types of analysis done, and also how long it takes to do those processes. But then also, because you've almost got infinite possibilities of the things that you can show, it's about sort of focusing down on exactly what you want to do. So, you know, we kind of abstracted from all of the possibilities into sort of place delineation. You know, how are people using places? You know, if you describe where is the city centre in a part, you know, a suburb of Tokyo, where is it? Well, you can use your data to kind of delineate that. And then we've got sort of descriptions of those places, so we know where somewhere is. Then we can describe what it looks like. So what are the different sort of combinations of different types of POI within there? And then from that, we can then look at the interactions within those places and the connections between those places. But as I say, because the data are huge, it's challenging because you want to do this at a global scale if you're going to make some kind of sort of global comparisons. And we derived lots of other metrics through sort of linkage to other data as well. So, you know, looked at sort of street geometries and things within these kind of localities. So in a sense, I suppose to summarize, the challenges are the data are massive, which is always challenging. It needs new methods that might be outside your sort of skill set. And there's also refinement of the infinite possibilities of interesting things that you might want to look at.
Yeah, I think Alex did a pretty good job covering the many challenges always involved in a research setting. Yeah, I think just reflecting on my work and discussing also with colleagues in the community, as Alex has been pointing out, I think when you have such multidimensional data, you have information about places, the types of places, or semantics, and also language and a social network on top. Sometimes it's hard to stay focused, and you're like, oh my God, I can do so many things with this data. So that's one classical challenge usually, like keeping the focus on. Yeah, and another one maybe has to do with things that have to do with they're particular to the research question you're asking and biases that may be coming in relation to that question. Let's say we know that typically social media services or mobile applications are used by young people, so certain demographics are more active than others. So if you're asking the question, how do old people move in New York City, maybe you won't get as accurate view as if you would ask the same question for different demographic segment as well. So identifying those biases and being able to balance them out, either by performing certain types of statistical analysis in the data, asking the right questions, or bringing in some other types of data in order to balance the biases, like census data, which obviously is not as dynamic and has other let's say limitations. I think it's a way to, let's say, take a first step to resolving some of these.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I love how, you know, your teams and your colleagues have respectively been able to overcome some of these challenges with more sophisticated data science models. Have you worked with others in more commercial applications to take learnings from the work that you've done in order to apply it to those commercial use cases? I think Alex maybe had some conversations with folks in industry.
Yeah, I mean, through the sort of ESRC, CDRC, I mean, we work with a whole range of stakeholders. And actually, there's quite a number of different applications where some of the work that we've done kind of feed, either data products that we've created, because we like the sort of phrase data products. We derive things from these data, are either used in commercial models, be it sort of consumer targeting or store location or something like that. And then other times we work with organizations to do specific pieces of work, which might be of kind of research value or interest. So a very good example of that was we worked with a national theatre show to develop a kind of real-time model of likely commuter flows to go and see a production. At that particular time, it was only in London. So we could estimate where consumers would be likely people to go and see, likely patrons of that particular show would drive to work. One of the things for their theatre show, which is really important, is outdoor advertising. So they display their adverts on sort of the electronic billboards, which sort of are along roads, but they won't necessarily know which ones to display on. So using this model, which links to kind of geodemographics, these flows are modeled along road networks, and we can actually estimate which are the best sort of targets. And they found that very effective. So we could work out where their targeting was working in the context of where they offered the show, and we could look at that in the context of these new locations around the UK where we've done it. We've actually done it in the US, in Broadway as well. It's kind of a replication of the technique we've developed in the UK. So again, it's an example of what I was saying about geographic data science. It's not, strictly speaking, the sort of thing that you would do in store location analysis or something that might come out of a geography program. It's a little bit more innovative than that, but also very, very powerful. And this is why I always try and promote the role for geographers in these conversations over just computer scientists, because we know about places and locations and so on. But the ideal is when you can get everyone to kind of work together in kind of synergy, but it does mean that geographers need to know a little bit of coding.
I'll agree with Alex, and I'll also mention that now I'm in an industry company called Firefly, and Foursquare is our go-to partner when it comes to attribution studies to our digital out-of-home advertising. So we just had some successful campaigns running, and we were in touch with your team for that. But yeah, I think when it comes to commercial applications, besides advertising, one use case that I have encountered quite a few times, and I think it's quite common, although not very well known and visible to, let's say, to the public, is, many times companies need to expand, and let's say I want to open a new shop, a new store somewhere, and deciding that location, and that goes at the core of location intelligence and what it means. I need to decide what is the best location to open my new supermarket, or my new, I don't know, gas station in a city, or my new mobile phone shop. So understanding what is the optimal location to place a store is a problem that is very relevant to commercial applications, and Foursquare data can be extremely valuable in terms of like building that understanding and quantifying it, and understanding, how does the competition of nearby businesses might affect my business and so on, or thinking about it in a more complementary way. Does the ecosystem of businesses in a neighborhood would foster activity and would send mobility flows to my business, and therefore it would be a good idea to start something there.
Yeah, absolutely. That sort of trade area analysis and site selection we see as key use cases for geospatial. And I think that it's interesting how maybe some of the methodologies that you developed in your studies and your team's expertise can then lend itself to that type of work. How do you anticipate using location technology in your future research? What are the possibilities that you see that you haven't tapped into yet?
So, I mean, I think one of the big areas in our field is what you can get out of satellite data, again, through a lens of new methods that aren't necessarily those skills that someone who's traditionally into remote sensing might do. So we've done some recent work, actually used some of the Foursquare sort of visualization platforms to visualize some of these, extracting insights out of satellite data for each postcode in the UK to give you a kind of descriptor of the sort of the built environment context of that. And I think where's exciting is when you can start using high resolution data and saying more specific things about places, but then also linkage to some of these other types of traditional data like sensors and surveys, but also digital footprints data where you've got aspects of dynamics as well. So I think the area of kind of data fusion with new methods or location data, I think that's probably where the most exciting area of application is going to be, and certainly where we're focusing a lot of attention in our lab at the moment.
Yeah, I think the methodological aspect that Alex just mentioned is very relevant. And yeah, if I may say, usually from my perspective, and I hope it's useful, I think it's very important to focus on the right research questions also at the right time. So your research questions are relevant to society. And so, you know, we are facing big challenges as humanity, like climate change and so on. So I think using Foursquare data in order to understand how people use green spaces, how does the economy of a city function in a sustainable way and so on. Yeah, posing the right questions that are more critical for our growth and development as a society and economy, and using Foursquare data, but also other forms of data like satellite data in conjunction to answer these questions could be something where one can drive impact to in the future.
Absolutely. We love to see how our partners and customers are combining location data with other data sets to yield even more powerful insights for different applications. So excited to continue the innovation there. We're just about out of time. So do you have any key takeaways from your experience using Foursquare's data and technology that you'd like to share before we sign off?
I had probably two. One would be the value is enhanced greatly by linkage to lots of other ancillary data, and because it's geospatial data, you can kind of do that with relative ease. And then I think in terms of the interaction data, just be critical of who you're not counting, so who's not being counted by the trajectory data, because I think that's another interest. In fact, it's actually the missing data, I think in itself, quite interesting. But yeah, you've also got potential bias there.
Yeah. Yeah, on my side, one of a few things that really stuck with me during the experience of using Foursquare data is actually sharing it, making the data accessible. For example, using that Future Cities Challenge we ran a few years back, making it accessible to as many academic and non-profit organizations as possible. What was amazing then, it was, you know, when you give these data to, let's say, masters and PhD students around the world, the ideas that come up with in terms of answering interesting questions or promoting the development of interesting technologies are amazing. And so I think much of the innovation that will happen in the future will lie on these, let's say, sharing process and creating a wider community around the globe that uses Foursquare data for good.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for the time today. And to your point about getting the data in the hands of as many people as possible, please do visit our website at location.foursquare.com, where we have a section for academics where you can explore different data sets that are readily available, and can of course contact us for more robust data sets as well. And we'd be happy to connect with you about your research needs. And thank you again to Tassos and Alex for your time and expertise today. It was wonderful to hear from both of you. And thanks to all for joining.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.